Welcome to Soul Lab, a Christian-based podcast utilizing logic, history, science, and scripture to better understand the Christian faith. And now your hosts, Delaney and AJ.
Hey guys, welcome to the episode of Soul Lab,
where today we are going to talk about the history of Bible translations. And I think we're going to look at a few things today. I know we're going to talk about the Old Testament, right? And the New Testament, and kind of like how they became the Old and New Testament. And I think we're also going to talk about maybe the Apocrypha a little bit. And what else do we have on the agenda?
I think that's really it, and kind of how the Apocrypha was weeded out too, which I find fascinating.
It is really interesting. And stay tuned, because at the very end, we're going to go over some of the different translations that we use today.
And
we'll talk about which one's our favorite, but also why some are problematic and maybe even dangerous to be using.
I didn't know that was a little piece of our episode.
It is, yeah. We got it covered.
Okay.
For starters, do you want to talk about what? You want to talk about the history a little bit?
Yeah, why don't you touch on the history? What's going on?
All right, cool. Let's start talking with the Old Testament.
Okay.
I feel like most of our conversation is, as Christians, we're Christ followers, which means we understand and we read the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? For the Old Testament, it's a little more simple. So start with what we use today. Today, the Protestant Bible has 66 books that are in it. And I think you said this earlier, but it was 39 Old Testament and 27 new.
Yeah.
That total accumulation of books. And just to clarify, we call them books. They're really mostly letters or writings, and they're not all, books. But anyways, these things we call books, they make up the group which we call the Bible, right? Which Protestants use as the Protestant Bible. And so that's where we're at today. Let's go back now to the beginning and see where it all started, right?
Yes.
So the Old Testament books, these were written around 1500 to 400 BC. Super long time ago. It's actually kind of funny that we call them Old and New Testament, because they're both really, really old. There's a reason for that, which we can delve into another time. But it was around 1500 to 400 BC. The Old Testament was mostly written it was Hebrew, and with a little bit in Aramaic.
Try to back up a little bit, though, because before that, the first record of the Old Testament was actually Ten Commandments, which was written in, I think, Aramaic, right?
So technically, if you want to say what's the first letter writing or the first thing that was handwritten, I would say it probably was the Ten Commandments, literally written by God.
I think 1400 BC, I think, was the day of Ten Commandments.
Right.
Which, for those of you who don't know, the history of that. So, essentially, Moses, good old Moses, he was out with the children of Israel, and he was leading them through the desert. And at some point in time, God called him to Mount Sinai to get these laws written, these 10 commandments as they're known today. And they were written on stone, and then, I think they're written on stone the first
Didn't God have to do it twice?
Yes, he did.
Didn't humans mess up a little bit?
Yes, they did. They did, yeah. They're written on stone. Moses takes these stone tablets down from the mountain, and as he gets to the bottom of the mountain, he looks out and he sees the children of Israel are worshiping an idol. And of course, the Bible, in fact, one of the 10 Commandments is specifically, you shall have no other gods before me. And so it was very much so against the message in which God had led them with.
And I feel like the crazy thing is, sorry, is it okay if I add this? The crazy thing is that God had just delivered them from Egypt.
Literally, yeah.
He just delivered them from slavery. Moses is gone for, I don't know how long, probably a very short time. It's interesting how quickly we human beings forget what God does for us, right?
Yeah.
And, it's like we look at that situation, we're like, how could they possibly do that? But then I feel like we do the same thing all the time, right?
All the time.
So sorry, I interrupted you. I just thought
No, you're good. No, I actually like that analogy a lot, because the children of Israel, I feel like a lot of the time they're discussed as being like they keep messing up. What's their issue? But in life, we do that all the time. And it might be not recorded in the Old Testament for everyone to read, but it's often. So anyway, Moses comes down. He sees them worship this idol. He gets angry and he throws the 10 Commandments down and shatters them. Now, what happened while he was on Mount Sinai, Moses' brother Aaron was at the time designated to lead the children while Moses was away. And the children of Israel I said children, they're adults, but that's what they're called, got agitated and asked Aaron to create a god which they could worship, similar to the gods they worshipped when they were in Egypt. So he created this god. I think the god he created was very similar to an Egyptian god, if not the same god. But he created this god from, he took all their jewelry and all their fine gold and melted it down and created this idol. And put it up for them to worship, and that's what Moses came upon and angered him.
Yeah.
So then he had to go back up to the mountain and have it done all over again with God. I feel like God was so patient because he was able to do it again.
Yeah.
What's interesting is to this day, the top of Mount Sinai is charred from where the cloud came down over the mountain, that cloud of fire.
It is really cool.
Yeah.
So just like, this is a teaser, I guess, but Mount Sinai is believed to have been found, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Which we'll do a whole episode on just that topic, but it's pretty incredible that we'll say the person who believes they found it, I strongly believe they did as well.
Well, so to clarify too, it's not in the traditional location of what is Mount Sinai now. What's called Mount Sinai is not actually the Mount Sinai of old.
Right.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's a different country. I think it's over the border. But we'll do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we'll cover it another time.
To this day, if you go up to Mount Sinai, you can see the blackened top of the mountain. And if you pick up a rock from that blackened top, it's only blackened on the outside, which is suggestive that it was burned and charred. There's also a bunch of stuff around the mountain that is representative of what kind of occurred around there. So we'll delve into that later.
So you've got the 10 Commandments, first handwritten form of God's word.
1400 BC.
Then skip forward until Moses is, very, very old. So Moses wrote what we call the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And then from there to the remaining Old Testament, you have different prophets recorded, different kings recorded. We'll just say different types of peoples God asked to record certain events. And that's, it's basically a story. And that's what we call the Old Testament. And so that was completed around 400 BC. Then we get to the New Testament. So the New Testament was completed in a much shorter, much more condensed amount of time. So Jesus, we believe, was roughly, born around 0 AD and died around 33 AD. Those are super rough numbers. It's somewhere within 10 years of that, I believe. I think, we researched this once?
Yeah, we got into a huge
I think we disagreed on this. And so we researched it really heavily and we realized because I thought we knew for sure the years. And apparently it's not accurate.
Right.
It's not super accurate, but it's within 10 years, which considering how long ago that was, that's pretty close. So the New Testament books were written around the time Jesus died. So let's just say around like 33 AD. Up until about 80 AD is when they were completed.
80?
AD.
That's so confusing. 80 AD.
Hold on. 80 AD.
Okay.
Anti-domino.
It sounds like the same word twice, but you're saying like 80 alpha delta.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does not mean after death.
Yeah, right.
That's a common.
People often think it means.
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding. If people think 80 means after death. I mean, technically,
it was after his death. I'm just
technically
saying.
It is after his death, even though he was alive as well. So it's Anno Domini or Anno Domini in the year of our Lord. That's how it's apparently actually said. So we have the New Testament authors have completed all their writings around 80 AD. So the next question is, how do we know which ones to trust, right? Because anyone can write a letter and send it out. Anybody can write a book and send it out, right? So I feel like the question is, if I lived around that time, would be, why should I trust your letter talking about Jesus? What about this guy's letter talking about Jesus?
Thomas versus Peter, because Thomas is not in the book, but Peter is.
Well, not even Apocrypha. Random dude down the street wants to write a book and say, I met Jesus.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know who's who?
Yeah, exactly. They had to use some logical, deductive reasoning there and figure out, okay, how can we decide what to trust? And there's a few different ways in which the churches around that time did that. And I think it's important to remember that Jesus died literally right before the authorship of these books began. It wasn't like 1,000 years went by and they're trying to remember, this isn't word of mouth by generation by generation. These are people writing who actually lived and breathed and ate with Jesus, who actually experienced Jesus, right? And the churches that were formed around this time are churches that were these churches were directly following Jesus. The only ones that got to have that blessing and that experience, to actually for sure get to listen and experience Jesus. In person.
Yeah, in the flesh.
I think that's what gives credibility to the churches themselves, in my opinion, is these aren't churches that were formed by just an average person deducing what they thought to be true. These are people who actually listened to Jesus, formed a group of people that they call a church to teach out of and to grow together with, that they learned directly from Jesus himself, which I think is absolutely awesome and incredible and is like a huge blessing for them. And absolutely necessary for this next piece. Skip forward to around 400 AD, and that's when these major churches decided, or I should say agreed on, what they were going to consider reliable. So around 400 AD, that's when these churches all started to agree on what were the reliable letters? What were the ones that we could actually consider canon? So there's three filters. I should say three main filters. They probably all used a bunch of filters to decide which ones. There's three main ones that all the churches used. And you probably know some of them. Do you remember any of them in your studies?
One of them was, does the book that they're considering, does it build upon the other books around at that time? Is it built upon the teachings of the others?
Does it contradict them or support them?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there was two other filters. What were they?
So the one that you just referenced is called narrative cohesion. It's the idea that the stories all line up, they all flow together, there's no contradictions, they all support each other. Narrative cohesions, that is a wonderful filter to use to see if something is true, to see if it makes sense. So the next one has to do with the apostles themselves. It's called apostolic origin, right? So basically this filter just means, keep in mind, Jesus died, the writings began immediately, right? So that means that the people that wrote them, they experienced Jesus personally. Like, they saw him, they watched him live, they watched him die, they watched him resurrect, and they wrote it. This wasn't their friend telling them the story. This is them telling their eye account. Apostolic origin means, is the letter that was it written by someone that actually experienced Jesus? They experienced Jesus. They didn't hear about Jesus. They experienced Jesus.
But Luke didn't experience Jesus.
Luke the
doctor.
There's two ways to do it. I'll read the definition, but apostolic origin means, was it written by or in witness of a confirmed apostle of Jesus?
Oh, okay. So Luke interviewed people who actually met Jesus.
Correct.
So that's why
Luke did a lot of research himself by asking eyewitnesses. And it's because of his research that his word is considered credible, right?
Okay.
And so Luke interviewed people. Maybe Luke didn't interview people who interviewed people.
Right.
Luke interviewed people who had direct relation to Jesus. For example, Jesus' mother, Jesus' brother, Jesus' friends.
Yeah.
And so that's why, because even though he didn't directly experience Jesus, all of his writings are about people who did, and it's their word that he's using.
Have you ever read his story?
Luke's story?
Yeah.
No. You're not saying Luke, like the chapters of the book of Luke.
Like his story about him. Not the story he wrote, but the story about him. It's so interesting. It is so interesting.
What makes it interesting?
Just the stuff he went through to write his books. Now I'm thinking about it, and I'm wondering if the book I read about him, if it's fiction or not. I don't think it is, but now I'm wondering maybe it was
I'm
fiction.
curious, yeah.
No, but
Just
the book
another apocrypha.
I know, it's so interesting though.
Yeah, interesting. All right, we got a third one. And the third one, I feel like, is also a really good filter. Like I said, these are the three main filters that all the church uses. But this one's called multi-church acceptance. If you have all these churches that were formed around the time Jesus lived, and they all claim to be churches that are Christ-oriented, they called it the way back then. They weren't Christians, but then what they could do is compare to each other and just make sure, hey, do we all collectively agree on this? Which doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you try to do that today with a bunch of different churches, because we have so many denominations, right? If you were to try and sit down and get like a Baptist to agree with a Seventh-day Adventist, or it would be very difficult, right? So, but they had to sit down and say, hey, what do we all actually agree on?
Right.
And so they said, okay, well, based on that filter, there's a lot of things that we don't 100% agree on, but if they can all collectively say we all 100% agree on these writings, that's a big deal. That I feel like that just builds to the credibility of those writings. It'd be the same thing as if every denomination today sat down and said, we all agree on this rule for Christianity. That's a big deal.
I mean, they don't even agree on some simple biblical rules. A lot of denominations disagree on.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. So those are the three filters that they used, and I like them. I think it builds, like I said, to the credibility of the New Testament. I think it builds to the credibility of the canon. It makes me feel better about the books that were chosen to be canon, that we consider canon in our Protestant Bible. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust an apocrypha book. I just feel like the canon was chosen very selectively and as much safer readings for you to put your time and energy into learning and understanding and using to grow closer to Christ. And so let's just say that's completed, by 400 AD. But I think you had mentioned to me that it wasn't recognized, I think, officially by, what was it, the Pope or
the Bishop of Alexandria?
Bishop of Alexandria?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jerome.
Wait, that's Saint Jerome? Oh, that's who I'm about to talk about next.
Perfect.
Okay. What I have is that Saint Jerome, he's the first person to compile the Old and the New Testament and the Apocrypha together into one book. We're going to say roughly 400 AD, right? Just whenever the churches were done agreeing on what's canon. St. Jerome was the first one to create a compilation of the Old, the New, and the Apocrypha. And so we're looking at somewhere around 76 to 80 books total. And what he did is he translated it from their original text. So you have the Old Testament, which is in Hebrew and Aramaic, and then you have the New Testament, which is mostly in Greek. And so he was the first person to take all that, translate it into Latin, and make it just one book. One translation, one language, one book for all 76 to 80-ish books, however many it was. That's called the Vulgate, by the way. That translation's called the Vulgate. And did you have anything on that?
I would love to get my hands on that.
The Vulgate?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that would be worth some good money to have one of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the Catholic Church has one hidden somewhere. So the next question is, okay, you have St. Jerome, who is the first person to create the Vulgate, which is the first completed compilation of the Bible, right? Put together. And that's in Latin. Most people don't read Latin. It's called a dead language. So the question is, how did it get into English? How did we English speakers become able to read it for the first time? And the answer to that was a man named John Wycliffe. Am I saying that right?
Prior to Wycliffe, just to back up a little bit, in 500 AD, the scripture was translated into 900 different languages. It was very widespread. And then later on in 600, so 100 years later, it went back to just Latin. It got condensed again. It was like, no, we're just going to do Latin.
What do you mean? Like they lost all those translations?
I think
burned them?
It was only a language allowed by the Catholic Church. So it was basically said that this was the only translation we can use, which we know is a theme. Wycliffe comes in to defy it, and then it goes back to Latin again, and then Martin Luther comes in, which is very interesting how it's been like muffled or stifled over the years.
So just to clarify, after the churches canonized the Bible, St. Jerome comes in, and St. Jerome creates the first actual Bible by compiling the Old, New, and the Apocrypha. You're saying that after that, it was translated into 900 languages.
I'm looking at my notes. It was actually 500, so I misspoke.
Oh, that's okay. So you're saying after that, it was translated into 500 languages. And that it seems like the Catholic Church tried to keep it just in Latin. Yeah. Right?
Which is interesting. A theme. It's a theme over history.
It is a theme over history. Yeah. So next we go to John Wycliffe. Right? Yeah. So John Wycliffe was the first person to translate it into English. And so what he did is he took the Vulgate itself, right? So keep in mind, the Vulgate is the original text translated directly into Latin. There's no middle ground. He took the Vulgate and translate it directly into English.
Right.
It's a pretty close translation. It's only going through two translations, two languages. And so he was a Catholic priest. He was an English Catholic priest. And I believe he was like excommunicated by the Catholic Church because of this, or didn't he got in big trouble?
Yeah.
And then I believe the Catholic Church tried to put a stop to it, but then it's like him and many other people did the same thing, and it was a battle for a while. So anyways, we'll talk about that another day. But since then, so since John Wycliffe, right, there's been over 100 translations in just English.
Yeah, because shortly after Wycliffe passed, a couple hundred years, I think 1400s, the printing press was created. And that boomed, obviously, translations of the Bible.
It was like when Martin Luther...
A couple years, 100 years before him, but yeah.
Yeah, because it's like you had the Reformation, you have the printing press, and then you have Martin Luther. Everyone's reading the Bible more, and they're starting to say, hey, we, kind of challenge the Catholic Church on this. Cool. Yeah. So we'll talk about that more in another episode. But,
but the printing press came out in the 1400s, and then 1500s, Martin Luther came out, and that was the Protestant Reformation, was Martin Luther. He was the head of that. So it kind of went hand in hand.
Interesting. Yeah. And skip forward to today. So now we've got, over 100 translations that are in English, and that's just English. Since then, since John Wycliffe, there's been over 100 translations that have been made into English. And some of them go through multiple languages. Some of them go from the original into Latin into something else into English. The majority of the ones that we use today that would be considered reputable translations that you would find in a physical Bible or on the YouVersion app, those are pretty simple translations, meaning they either went straight from the original text to English, which we can do now. We have more accurate understanding of languages, or they go to Latin and then to English.
Okay.
But it's a common myth when people say, oh, the Bible can't be trusted because it's been translated so many times. No, actually, the most Bibles we use have only been translated once.
It's the right Bible.
Twice.
You can't just pick up any old Bible.
There's some
King
translations
James.
I agree that maybe you shouldn't trust,
King
which we'll
James.
talk about more.
Okay, so in 1611, the King James was printed, and that contained Old Testament, New Testament, and what we now call the Apocrypha.
Oh, okay.
All of that was in there.
Yeah.
And then in the 1880s, 1885, the Protestant Church began to reject the Apocrypha. And it actually was not removed, I did not know this, from the Protestant Bible to the 1800s, 1885.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's relatively recent. So until recently, these books were considered biblical. And so if you look back in history, sometimes certain events in history, I'm like, why would, like Christian events, I'm like, why would that be biblical? Well, they had a different Bible, they had different theology than we had because they had 14 books that we don't have anymore. So 1885, Protestant churches felt that those books did not align with their theology, and so they removed them, which I find very interesting because the Catholic Church still has those books.
Right.
But all of these churches in the Protestant faith removed these books because they didn't like how they aligned with their theology. And so I don't know. I wasn't there for that meeting, so I don't know. I can really say my piece on it because I can't actually hear the logic that was had there. Just hearing that sentence, it bothers me.
Yeah.
They didn't align with their theology, but who knows what that really means.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, is it that it didn't align with their theology, or is it they felt like it contradicted or potentially demonized in some way their theology?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Just 'cause my theory is that the printing press was invented 1400s, right? Didn't you say 1400s? Martin Luther was 1500s?
Yep.
Right? So we know that printing press is invented, literacy rates are going up, everyone's able to read the Bible themselves now instead of just listening to what the Catholic Church is telling them, because that's what's been for the longest time. And so they're forming their own opinions, they're reading the Apocrypha, and they're thinking, this doesn't seem to line up with Scripture, some of these books. And so I wonder if they're kind of using some of the same filters that the original churches were using to try and see that.
My question would be, was the Bible, was the 14 books of the Apocrypha kind of separated in the Bible? Because we know the Bible now to be Old Testament, New Testament. Was it then considered Old Testament, New Testament, and Apocrypha? Because if that's the case, it makes more sense. But if it was just like mixed in there and they were like, oh, I don't like this one, I don't like this one, I have more of an issue with that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the Catholic Church, what we call Apocrypha, they consider many of those books in their Bible.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't call it Apocrypha.
Right. It's just Old Testament and New Testament.
Yes, Old Testament, New Testament. It has it in there.
Actually, the Bible, when I was living overseas, we lived in an apartment complex. And I'm not sure how it got there, if someone left it there or if all the apartments had it. But at the base of our complex, in the stairwell, above all the mailboxes was a book, like a Bible. And it was the Catholic Bible. So it had the Apocrypha in it. And that was my first experience with the Apocrypha. I was, I think, 11. And I was so offended that our Bible didn't have these books in it. I thought we were like heathens. I was like, we have taken books out of the Bible? I was horrified. Of course, I didn't know the history back then, but it's just interesting.
Yeah.
But especially now, because I'm, 26 now, so that was over a decade ago, and I'm still kind of not sitting well with the idea that we're missing 14 books.
You know, so I felt the same way one day. So I bought the Apocrypha books. Like there's a single book you can buy that's just all Apocrypha, right? I have it over my bookshelf.
I have one too.
And I bought it because I was like, man, I feel like I'm missing out. Let me read these books. I read the Book of Enoch, and I feel like I immediately understood why these books were taken out.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah. Because some might say, oh, it's cool information. I kind of view it as take it with a grain of salt because could some of this be true? Sure. I feel like it's not necessary. I don't need it personally. And I feel like it's dangerous because if it's not accurate or not true, right? I'm memorizing and learning things that are going to, I think, hinder my understanding of God and are going to hinder my relationship with Jesus personally. I feel like it's more dangerous to read these books than not to.
See, I have two arguments, one for that, one for against it. One being that in the days of old, and by old I mean like the 1800s, a lot of things that Christians did, I have a hard no against, like the Salem witch trials, things like that. That just to me don't make sense. Things I think are cruel and unusual.
What year was that?
I think it was 1600s, I think.
1600s? So before they took the Apocrypha out?
Yeah, it was before the Apocrypha was out. And a lot of different beliefs too back then, before the Apocrypha was out.
Sure.
And so my idea then is that was their theology, that was their philosophy. So they had a different kind of approach to religion than I do now. Is that because we have a different Bible? Maybe, maybe not. But if that is how they thought and they had that old Bible, then no, I don't want anything to do with that. You know what I'm saying? To me, that's not a Christian way to approach life.
I see what you're saying.
But at the same time, if their reasoning was for a different cause, then maybe I do want to read the Book of the Apocrypha. So that's my argument for your argument. But my opposing argument would be, what is that translation of that you read the Apocrypha? Is that the most accurate? Because what we do now is we're going to get to in a minute, we don't read the King James Bible, the New King James. You read the ESV, I believe. Yeah. So what kind of was mistranslated in the Apocrypha, and what is the most accurate translation?
Yeah. So I think it's important to remember the Apocrypha can be translated the same way the Bible can be, right?
Yes.
So just like there's NIV, ESV, New King James.
Yep.
For the Bible, there is also for the Apocrypha, right?
And we know the Apocrypha was translated with a New King James lens, because that happened in the 1600s, and Apocrypha wasn't removed to the 1800s.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, when we look at how many books were canonized back in 400 AD, it wasn't all of the Apocrypha books that we have today. So I think if I pull up my Apocrypha book, it has 34 books in it. But we talked about like 17-ish then. They were not all canonized.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
To be clear.
Oh, interesting.
Some of them were part
I was
of
going
that
to
canon
say,
back then.
Let's go ahead and go over the list. There's the Book of Tobit, Judith, the Book of Wisdom, which I think is beautiful. I want to read that. The Book of Sirach, I believe is how you say it, or Sirach, maybe Sirach. Baruch, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Maccabees. 1st and 2nd Esdras, Prayer of Manasses, Enoch, Jubilees, Joshua, and Psalms 151. So there it is, the Apocrypha, and all of the apocryphal additional to Daniel and Esther, which makes sense too, because Esther kind of has a very abrupt end. I've always been like, that's the end of the book, so that makes sense. Yeah. And that includes the Prayer of Azariah, Susanna, and the Bell and the Dragon, which, going back to our dragon episode, I want to read that now, Bell and the Dragon. But the 1800s, when the Apocrypha was removed from the Bible, it reflected too, because at that point in time, there's a huge boom in the Protestant faith, where lots of different Protestant religions came out of a certain event that had happened at that point in time. And so possibly that kind of played into them removing that Bible, because they had a whole boom. So with that big boom in the 1800s, that was not that long ago. So in that big transition where the Apocrypha was removed and we had all these religions coming out in the 1800s, fast forward 140 years where we're at today, we have dozens, hundreds, I would argue, of translations of the Bible.
Yeah. There's over 100 in English.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you read them side by side, sometimes you're like, that does not say what that says. Kind of tell us a little bit about how you choose your Bible.
All I can tell you is what AJ thinks is the right method of choosing a good translation.
Okay.
Right. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the perfect translation. It's the one that I like the best. I trust the most, right?
Okay.
It's the one I feel safest with. Because my fear when I'm reading translations is I don't want to read that translation that people talk about where they say, oh, it was translated and translated and translated and translated. How can it be trusted? I don't want to read that translation. Totally agree with that. I want to read the one that is most accurate, right?
And by accurate, explain what you mean by accurate.
Well, that leads me to my definition. My definitions of there's 3 categories that translations fall in. When I say accurate, I mean how close is it to the actual original text? How accurate is it to that?
Gotcha.
So there's 3 buckets that all translations fall in. They're either word for word. Word for word means it was translated as close as possible immediately, like from the word that is said in Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic, like the original text, to the language you're reading. That's word for word. And so word for word can usually be a little harder to read because when you translate something word for word, and it doesn't matter what the culture is, if you from any culture, any time period, to your modern culture and, to your language and your modern culture, it's not going to sound the way you talk, that you read, because it was from a different time period, a different type of people. There might be phrases they use that don't make sense. There might be different word orders that don't make much sense. It's not going to be as easy to understand, but word for word just means you need a higher reading level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the next level after that, which is thought for thought. In a thought for thought translation, most of the words are not changed. Most of the words are still the same. Some things are going to be moved around or reworded to make it a little bit easier to read, to make it a little more modern for the average person who lived today to understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have the third bucket. The third bucket is called paraphrasing. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Paraphrasing means pretty much all the words are changed and it's made to be as easy to read as possible. So what you usually find word for word translations are going to be more literal. Thought for thought translations are going to get the point across. And then paraphrasing is going to tell it as easily as possible. And paraphrasing is usually like a children's Bible.
Okay.
That's basically what that's used for. A majority of translations are thought for thought. because the average person wants to have an easier translation to read. But in my humble opinion, I think the best translations are word for word. The ones that take the actual original text directly to your native language, whatever language you're reading. And there's a few that I was considering when I was doing my research, but there's one in particular that really stood out to me that I thought not only is it a word for word translation, but the method in which it was created was done very credibly. The translation that I like to use is ESV.
Okay.
It stands for English Standard Version.
Okay, that's what I asked.
This translation started in 1990, ended around 2001. So it's an 11-year period of translation. That's actually a very long time.
It is.
Especially for the number of people that were involved in it. So you had, I think it was over 100. Yeah, you had over 100 pastors and scholars who worked together and oversaw its creation. What they did was, for their base, they used it's called the Biblia Hebrea Stuttgartensia. And that's basically the Hebrew Bible.
Why are you laughing when you say it?
Because I can't say it.
Okay.
I know I just butchered that.
Is that German?
I think
Stuttgart is a place in Germany.
I think so.
My dad used to work in Stuttgart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They use the Hebrew Bible as their base. Whenever you're doing a translation, you have to pick your base. You have to say, okay, what am I going to start with? That's your base. They use the Biblia Hebrea.
Which means Hebrew Bible?
Which means Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
As their base for the Old Testament.
Okay.
Super simple. It means they use the original text. And then they use the Greek New Testament as the base for the New Testament, which once again, it was originally written in Greek. They're using the base of what it was originally written. So the Biblia Hebrea and the Greek New Testament are known for being accurate. And so you have an accurate base, and they go straight from there to English, right?
Yeah.
On top of that, it's a word for word translation. On top of that, you have 100 pastors and scholars that are working together to translate it. On top of that, they took 11 years to do it. They took their time, because for 100 people, that's a long time to do this translation. They're constantly checking each other, like cross-checking each other. There's more than one person reviewing every single book, every chapter, every word, and making sure that it's as accurate as possible. And for me, I feel like that is the most accurate translation. That's why I call it the most accurate translation. It's because I feel like it's the safest one to use because of the way in which they did it and the effort that was put behind it.
ESV Apocrypha.
Yeah.
Wow. So maybe I'll get my hands on one of those. Because I am a believer that the Apocrypha should still be in the Bible, which you and I disagree on.
Well, when you say the Apocrypha, which ones?
The 14.
Just the 14?
Yes.
So I think that includes
the 14
Enoch.
The 14 that were pulled.
Even though Enoch was written thousands of years after his death, it was not written by an eyewitness or anyone that knew him or his family.
Yeah.
It was his stories of stories of stories of stories of stories for thousands of years that were passed down.
No, I will say that I've never read the Apocrypha, so my opinion may change. I read the Apocrypha. I do want to include the Apocrypha only because for so long and for so many thousands of years, it was considered the Bible. And I think that just to pull it for certain religions and for the reasons it was pulled, my understandings of the reasons it was pulled seems sketchy to me. So maybe I was there in the conversation or had a better understanding of why it was pulled.
Yeah.
I have a different opinion.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something I can research at some point in time is more specifically. Now, I did have trouble for this episode finding why it was pulled because I didn't look. I didn't spend, this episode isn't just on the Apocrypha.
Yeah.
I didn't spend my whole time on just this, but I did struggle to find the reasoning behind why it was pulled. Besides, it didn't align with their theology, which seems a little bizarre to me. Yeah. That's my logic. But I would like to read it in the ESV version and then kind of figure out what I think about it. Now, I don't think Enoch wrote, like you were saying, I don't think Enoch wrote the book of Enoch. But
definitely didn't. He's dead for thousands of years.
But we know certain stories get passed down. So I don't know. I'd like to kind of read it and figure out what I think. Now that I know there's an ESV version, I'm reading it.
See, I think this is a good thing. I think it's good for our viewers to see this, but like I disagree super strongly.
Okay,
on the
hit
subject.
me with it, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel
but you've read it, so I feel like you have more.
Well, I disagree with not just Enoch. I'm saying I disagree entirely with reading the Apocrypha.
Oh, like
personally.
Period.
I think that if you want to read it, I think if anybody wants to read it, you read it like it's a storybook, like it's a children's book.
Not like
you read
the
it,
Bible.
it's not scripture. Yeah, you read it and you say, I'm going to read it, but work really hard to memorize and remember that is not part of the Bible. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with somebody, had small group, someone will throw a biblical fact out there and I'll say, actually, I think that was in the book of Enoch. And they'll say, no, it wasn't. And we'll pull it up like, yeah, it was. That's not canon. And it's something that honestly doesn't really, in my opinion, doesn't belong in canon, me personally. I feel like it's more dangerous than helpful. And I think I understand. I really think it makes sense why they didn't include it in the canon. I mean, I just used the Book of Enoch as an example, but its credibility is almost zero. I mean, it was written thousands of years after his death. Very opposite of all of the canonized books, which were written within 50 years of Jesus's death, eyewitnesses.
Yeah, but it was canonized for hundreds of years, so it's just sketchy. I'm just saying it's sketchy.
Yeah.
I mean, the general Bible for hundreds of years had these 14 books. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's sketchy.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do a whole episode on the Apocrypha at some point.
Maybe we can
in
do
time.
that sometime.
Yeah.
Maybe we can dive deeper into that.
Yes,
So,
because I would love to kind of, I don't
Yeah.
know, but it had to be fun.
yeah, it'd be good. It'd be
Yeah.
good. Anything else you have on the subject?
At some point in time, we will discuss problematic translations.
Mhm.
We have a episode on conspiracy theories that we'll do at some point where we'll discuss the changing of different words in different
Mhm.
translations throughout the
Yeah.
Bible history.
I
Because there's
think
a lot
I
of
think it'd be good to do that actually
there's a-
because
there's a lot of Bibles that say this as a fact, and it's
Yes.
actually that's made up. Yeah.
yeah, if I could end with saying this. So the thing that I want to leave our listeners and viewers with is make sure the translation you're reading has credibility, whatever it is. I don't really care what it is. I like ESV. If you don't like it, that's fine. I get it. Word for word's kind of annoying to read sometimes. But just research and make sure it has credibility, because there are translations out there that I believe to be very dangerous to read, because like you said, they'll say something in English, and when you look at the original text, it's completely different and dangerous. And we can do a whole episode on that sometime. But I think it's good for people to research and understand what they're reading, like which translation they're reading and why. Don't just do the one that your church reads. Don't just do the one that your friends and family read.
Yeah.
Do one
Figure
that
out
you
for
research and
yourself.
chose because you trust it,
Figure
right?
out for yourself what you want. But yeah, until next time, we'll be reading the ESV, and
Yeah.
I'll be reading the Apocrypha. Maybe you won't. Stay tuned for conspiracy theories. Kind of mystery in
Yeah.
there. Yeah. And for now, we've been your hosts. This is AJ.
And Delaney.
Yeah, I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Soul Lab with AJ and Delaney. You can find all materials referenced from today's episodes in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our website for more episodes and stay tuned for the next release. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.